My name's Guy Hands, and I'm the Chief Investment Officer and Chairman of Terra Firma Capital Partners. At its broader sense, private equity is investing in non-public stocks, either the stock or buying the company, the whole company, which is not listed on a public exchange. However, more narrowly, it tends to be more today in the LBO area, i.e. leveraged buyouts. So it focuses very largely on using a combination of debt and equity to buy a company. It tends not to be the same as venture capital though. So normally private equity won't put the initial capital into a business. It's more at the point where the company is already operating. So if you like, venture capital forms company, private equity can grow companies once they're already formed into a reasonably decent size. One of the latest projects we did was a company called RTR. RTR is in Italy. What it consists of is a number of sites across Italy where electricity is produced through solar power. The national grid in Italy was a seller of these sites. Now the business they sold consisted of the sites, it consisted of the solar panels, it consisted of the connection to the grid, but they didn't actually have an independent management team to run the business. So we bought from Turner the assets, and then we put in place a management team then to manage those assets. And that would be for us a very typical deal. For private equity as a whole, that's a little bit unusual. Normally, most private equity would come in at the point where the business is formed and has a management team. So the business we now have would be the more normal point where a private equity firm would purchase. For me, what I enjoy is seeing the businesses change and be transformed and adapt to the market. One of the problems you have in a public arena is you have quarterly reports. And the public arena, you are really playing to the gallery. You're playing to your shareholders, you're playing to the press. In private equity, you can spend most of your time working on how do you move the business forward. How do you concentrate on what is going to make the business successful over a longer period. And it's one of the interesting things that traditionally people said that private equity was short-term and the public markets were long-term. And that probably was true back in the 70s and 80s, where private equity tried to do deals which had a sort of 2 to 3 year life. And the public markets, often people held shares for 10, 15 years. Today, however, the average shareholding is only a few months. By contrast, private equity holdings have got longer and are more in the 5 to 7 years. So what I like is just seeing how a business can be built over a number of years and adapt to the market and be successful. Most private equity firms are very small. Maybe some of them are as small as 10 people, but even the largest are only going to be a few hundred. And in any one geographical location, they're probably not going to be more than 60 or 70. Which means that you have to be able to do a lot of different disciplines. So at one time, you're talking to a CEO about what his plans are for the business and where he wants to go with the business and how much capex he wants. Literally an hour later, you can be talking to an investment banker about where could you float a business, what are the capital markets like, and then 2 hours after that, you can be sitting there just going through documentation with a lawyer, trying to make sure you protect your investors as well as you can in the contract negotiation. So you're constantly having to deal with different personalities and different intellectual fields. And that is both satisfying and frustrating. We need people who are very scientific, very mathematical, very analytical, but they also need to have very good interpersonal skills, because we're trying to transform businesses. And it doesn't matter how good you are intellectually at understanding what you need to do, you also need to have the strength of personality to be able to work with people to get that change to happen. Because you as a private equity firm don't actually do the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting is done in the company. So you have to work through other people. And so I would say the sort of, the skill you need is the ability to be able to step back and be intellectually very pure, but at the same time, the emotional intelligence to be able to then work with individuals to get things done, or make the decision that these individuals aren't capable of doing it and hire other people. So it's a really interesting variation between intellect and personality. Everyone in private equity starts the same way, which is on spreadsheets. I think the difference is, in Terra Firma, we actually have an entry for graduates and postgraduates. So for people who don't necessarily have 2 or 3 years of work experience. And that's unusual. Most private equity firms only take people who've done 2 or 3 years, probably in an investment bank or consultancy firm, and then have gone and got an MBA. But regardless of how you enter, whether you enter as an MBA, whether you enter as after 3 years in a bank, whether you enter straight out of university, everyone starts off on spreadsheets. And that's not a bad way to start, as long as you understand that the spreadsheets are just a hope of what's going to happen, but they're not ever anything more than that. You learn very quickly that translating the spreadsheet into reality is where the real skill comes. Most private equity firms, you have it's very much a set career path, and you to some extent you're waiting for dead man's shoes. You're waiting for someone above you to go so that you can move up. What we try and do in Terra Firma is we deliberately encourage people to also think of the alternative, which is not necessarily following through a traditional private equity career, but going somewhere else. So we have people who go into our businesses. So they join thinking they're going to become a private equity finance person, and they end up running a business. We've had one person who went all the way from doing spreadsheets to being a CEO of a FTSE 100. And that's a completely different progression from what he ever imagined he was going to do when he joined. But he actually proved very good as being a CEO and managing companies. So people change. We have a lot of people who've gone on to be CFOs of companies. So within us, there is no particular reason why you'll end up for the rest of your life in private equity. We obviously would like some people to end up for the rest of their lives in private equity, because that's how we build our business. But there's no way we could accommodate everyone. And I think it's important that we give people the opportunity to do other things. The current climate is impacting private equity. What it's doing is it's making the business much more difficult, which in some ways is good, in some ways is bad. In all businesses, they have cycles. For people entering the business, that's perfect. You want to enter a business in a down cycle. So I would say this is a great time to enter. It's just more difficult to get in. The main thing I'm looking for is something which is different, and also ideally something which demonstrates some entrepreneurial spirit. So I suppose my ideal CV would be somebody who's done science at university, but ran a small business while they were there, and speaks Mandarin, and plays a musical instrument. So they've got something on the arts, they've got something with regard to culture, they've got something with regard to science, and they've got something with regard to money. So the very much the Renaissance person, but that's quite unusual. But we've hired people who've done everything from ballroom dancing to cage fighting, and those sort of things are interesting. It's having a passion for what you do and doing that well, which interests me. I'm not so worried about what it actually is, but if you've really got a passion for something, whatever that passion is. I once hired somebody who was a tea rose grower. They were obsessed with roses and were a spectacular grower of roses. That's a strange thing for someone in their early 20s to be doing. But they clearly had a passion for that, and they'd clearly been very successful at it. And they actually were very good at business as well.